what the Uganda People's Congress Party created and fed off was a politics of envy. Okay? That why are we small elites here when we can be big elites in Kampala? What is the obstacle? Buganda. Okay? So get rid of Buganda. And then they all moved in. They are now the ones living in Kololo. They're now the ones living in Nakasero. They're now the ones sending their children to all those schools.
Instead of creating a system which enables...
Yeah, so that is one type of consciousness that emerges. That becomes a political currency and a political tool. And that has...
Hello and welcome. In this episode of The Observer Viewpoint, I get the opportunity to talk to writer, critic, theatre, director, filmmaker, Robert Kalundi Serumaga, who is known for his work as a writer and journalist and analyst. Robert, so nice to have you for this conversation. You know, more famously, not too long ago, I think in 2024, you wrote a piece which I think is very seminal, and I've used it quite many times in my work, where you said, Parliament is the bride. And I want to start there from your conversation, from your piece where you argue quite eloquently that Parliament is the bride. And I'm curious to know, express that we are in some sort of a democratic parliamentary democracy where members of the general public elect their representatives, go to parliament and deliberate on so many of these issues that affect the country. If you say parliament is the bride, where does that leave our parliamentary democracy?
Thank you very much, Yusuf. Allow me to just point out one small thing. Most people call me Kalundi. Robert is a historical name that I was given, I think even accidentally, from my father, because it doesn't even actually appear on my birth certificate. So I prefer being called Kalundi, if it's okay with you.
That's very fine with me.
Yeah. I think my first question to your question, or my first questioning of your question, is to wonder why you are saying that we have a parliamentary democracy. Because personally, I don't think we do. I don't think we have certainly had one since 1966. When the term of the first parliament expired, because the first parliament was elected around the time of independence. And actually, the problem of 1966, what amounted to a military coup, no matter what our friends who still belong to the party that did it at the time think, that parliament's term expired. And when the 1967 constitution was brought by the regime that had driven out the president, and the old prime minister declared himself the president through the 1967 constitution, the electoral term of that parliament had expired. Prior to that, of course, during the colonial period, for a very short period of the colonial period, you had let me call it an intern parliament, or a trainee parliament.
Is it the legislative council?
Which is the legislative council, called the LegCo, which was like a practice team for when independence would come. So I wouldn't even count that one so much, because so many things were off limits to it.
But in your piece, you actually count that as the first parliament.
Yes, I count it as...
And the critique you raise seems to grow from the LegCo.
Yes, but that's what I would say, that to go as far as calling it a parliamentary democracy would ignore two important facts. That you've tended to have this situation where there's a place where political people can get elected and collect and talk about things. but behind it there's some kind of an iron fist. The first iron fist was, of course, the colonial government itself. Although the LegCo was important because it laid the model for this parliament that we're talking about today. What do I mean by that? I mean that after the nationalist riots or the anti-colonial riots
The
of
1940.
1945 and 1948, 1949,
Yeah.
which seem to have shaken the colonial authorities very seriously. They really made a decision that they could no longer continue governing the way they had been governing before. This is where the LegCo comes from. Okay,
Yeah.
where they say, okay, let's create a forum where people can come and speak and have 1 or 2 laws and measures passed and feel that they have been heard. And the governor of the time who came with this reformist agenda, Andrew Cohen, obviously a very clever man, he even told his people back in London, he wrote to his bosses in London and told them that don't assume that everyone who is opposed to the current colonial arrangement is an enemy of Britain. Some of them are simply concerned about what they get out of the situation. So if we can accommodate them, you can create a group of people you can work with. He said that don't assume that their ambitions and goals are different from ours. We just need a formula. And the formula was the LegCo. That lesson was lost with 1966, where Milton Obote and his government were just squeezing everybody.
But wait a second. Would you call that formula a parliament in the original sense? Because first you call that an internship, but also you argue that it's accommodative of supposedly opposed groups. So would you say from 1949 going forward up 1966, we had what we'd call a parliament? Is that what you want to say?
That's a very difficult question for me, because you are taking me into an argument about, similar to the argument that we're having today after the unfortunate murder of that young man, about borders. People are saying that now you see these borders have become a problem in the city. We need to do something about it. We need to bring a better transportation system. But the question that arises is that why are you constantly being asked to choose between 2 bad choices? Okay? Because the city is full of small roads, it's congested, it's overcrowded. It is a product of the collapse of the rural economy. That is why everyone is migrating to the urban spaces. So even if you bring a new so-called transportation system, you're not solving the underlying problem. So when you ask me, what was it?
What was it then?
Whatever. My personal problem, or my personal political problem, is the existence of Uganda as a concept.
Okay.
So whether you put a parliament there, or don't have a parliament, or have something pretending to be a parliament, I don't believe it can solve the problem.
Is it possible for us, Kalundi, to ratify the idea of Uganda? Because if you're not discussing 2026, are you comfortable ratifying the concept that they think exists and we need to constantly work on and making sure it gets to work for everybody?
Okay, put it this way. In a sense it does, because Parliament, the creation of the 1995 Constitution and the Parliament that comes out of it, was actually a process of settling the war that started in 1981. Okay. You see, that particular war, of course, the NRM tell it in their own way. If you listen to them, you might think that they were the only ones fighting in that war. But there were up to 6 or 7 different armed groups. And none of them necessarily grew to the size that the NRA grew to. But actually the NRA is growing to the size it grew to
was one of the things that created the problems that led to the NRA having to secretly talk to the UPC regime, which led to the overthrow of the UPC regime by a faction within it that was opposed to such talking taking place. So you had a general situation in the country where the population were being mobilized to take up arms against the regime and therefore against the state. This was of great concern, number one, to the imperialists, because they didn't create Uganda out of idleness. Uganda is a very useful income generating project for them.
Yeah.
And they wanted to always remain on the continent and in the form that it is here.
Would you, I want to follow properly whether you're arguing for, like happy ever after ending, that at some point we're living the legacy of colonialism. It sounds like Mamdani's argument that at some point later, if all these legacies are done away with, the continent becomes better. I don't know how we will be organizing. I can't overcome.
No, that's a very good question. And what I would say is that what you need is in the end is the creation of a forum where people can actually speak properly and say what they actually want and have that.
What would that be? What would that be?
Well, we nearly had it with the Constituent Assembly. If the NRA had managed to control itself, because the Constituent Assembly was kind of like a expanded repeat of the Moshi Unity Conference, where all the recognized political groups were finally given a forum to sit and talk and design a model with minimum interference. Yeah, because of course the UPC, which was very close to the Nyerere government, tried to hijack that process, and they were rebuffed. And Nyerere didn't try to interfere to insist that Obote's people should simply be allowed to hijack the Moshi Unity Conference. Don't forget that the Moshi Unity Conference is the first time Ugandan political actors sit round the table and talk about the future of their country or the future of their politics, since maybe the Lancaster House conferences that created the independence model,
I would ask,
or maybe the 1962-66 Parliament.
Are you able, Kalundi, to sort of extrapolate and think about other units which were organized? I don't want to argue this is unique to Uganda. I'm curious, how does Kenya manage to sort of, because Cohen wasn't limited to Uganda. It was also, there was a colonial master in Kenya. Tanzania was under colonialism, and all these imaginaries of having a legislative assembly, you can call it that way. In the context, if you would want to take it away from Uganda, because I'm curious if you think this is unique to Uganda, the corruption and the hijacking.
No, all post-colonialism, or what we would properly call neo-colonialism, is based on the co-option of a certain section of the domestic population who are prepared to, for their own, share their own cut of the deal to continue maintaining the underlying colonial economic arrangements so that the imperialists can continue making money. And depending on the particular circumstances, this can be a lot, this can be a little, this can involve a lot of people, it can involve very few people. Kenya's co-optation was much broader. It brought on people from very many different parts of the country. But the dynamic was the same, because first of all, during the run-up to the negotiations for independence, there were arguments by various native leaderships of various ethnic groups saying that how come the negotiations for independence in Kenya are not including them, yet the negotiations for the peace treaties that ended the wars against colonialism, that allowed the Kenyan colony to be built, were with them. In other words, when the British invaded and overthrew the various traditional governments and forced them to sign treaties and said, we are now going to protect you, so-called. They did it with the native leaders. But when the time came to negotiate independence, they were ignoring the native leaders and dealing with a whole new class of people who had been created by the colonial education process. This was the exact same argument in Kenya as it was in Uganda. The Kalenjin were saying it. The entire region of Mombasa was saying it, because they were saying that we were never part of Kenya. We were being governed by Britain, alongside Britain governing Kenya, but Mombasa was a separate part. Mombasa is not part of Kenya.
Are you making the proposition that for us to build afresh, the current design is set up of what we call our parliament is built on the wrong premise?
Well, not yes and no, in the sense that people will have to sit down somewhere and talk. And the easiest way to organize that is to invite people to elect leaders whom they think can speak on their behalf, to go and sit in one place and discuss something. This was OHT Wadan Morika's argument, which people have never paid attention to. He says that people must understand that there's a fundamental difference between a delegate and a representative. Okay? He said that the structure of the creation of the Constituent Assembly was what? What were the members of the Constituent Assembly called?
They were delegates.
They were called CA delegates.
Yeah.
He says a delegate is sent to deliver a message. Okay? Is delegated, go and tell those people this. And then come back and say this is how they have responded. And then further discussions take place. A representative is sent to go and negotiate and create new things. So he says a member of parliament is a representative, but the people in the CA were delegates. So he says that they were sent, at least from Uganda, with specific messages that they want to federate the country. They were not sent to say we want to negotiate whatever proposals are on the table. Which is why I go back to my original point, my earlier point, of saying that the CA had a chance to work if the NRA had managed to control itself. Because the sequence was like this. The constitution-making process begins with a commission called the Odoki Commission, which is asked to go and make a survey and find out the sentiment and mood throughout the country. What kind of things do people want? And they designed a process which everyone saw and approved, and they went and did their work, and they came back with their results. And their results were those two famous figures. One, everybody wants multipartyism, and two, people want federation. But there are two levels of this wanting federation. In Uganda, the surveys produced that up to 90% of respondents were saying they want federation. Outside Uganda, they were saying up to 60% of the respondents want federation. So the next stage was then, okay, elect a CA. So people are elected. They were supposed to be elected on a non-partisan basis. You were supposed to simply stand up and your area chose you or not. And then once they were chosen, elected, and assembled, they were supposed to receive the Odoki report, which will tell them that you are here to write a constitution. This is what the population are saying they want. Okay? Now, the minute you see a process or any kind of system which produces an output that is the direct opposite of its raw inputs, you know that there has been manipulation.
I'm curious now, how do you manage the corruption? How do you manage safeguarding against the corruption? Because once you start to choose amongst yourselves, most likely you get the supposedly the best from amongst you, the most educated. So once they go to meet in the Constituent Assembly, how do you manage to safeguard against reproducing a thing which is different from the Odoki Commission report?
You need to read a lot more of Professor Dan Nabudire. if you want to read very quickly, I would recommend there's a section from one of his books. The book is called Imperialism and Revolution in Uganda. And the section is called Reform and the Politics of Negotiation. Because you see, he describes how Cohen did a very interesting thing. The anti-colonial movement in this country was unique in many ways. And one of the things that made it most unique was that it was an economic movement as much as anything else. It was a movement led by farmers and smallholders and urban traders and trade unionists, that is truck drivers and, as I said, traders and people like that. And that was its foundation, its grassroots. So number one, it was financially autonomous. Okay. It wasn't receiving grants or scholarships from anybody. Number two, it was being led from the bottom. Okay. What Cohen did with his reforms, like one of the laws, among the laws they passed when Cohen came, was to legalize trade unions and legalize political parties. Then they put in terms and conditions. They said, for example, if you have a history of having been a trade unionist, a trade union leader, or if you are a trade union leader now, you cannot become a leader of a political party. And also the opposite. If you have a political history, or you're leading a political party now, you cannot involve yourself in trade union activities. This created a historical separation of politics from grassroots activism in this country. That's the first thing it did. Then the second thing it does, of course, is to expand this, whatever they were having before, their council into the LegCo, to allow people to be elected to it and people to be appointed to it and so on. So what he does is that he gives the middle class a forum, okay, where they can sit and talk without being accountable to the grassroots movement. But he doesn't give the grassroots movement a similar forum. Okay, so the grassroots movement begins to separate and disintegrate, whereas now the middle class sitting in the LegCo become the center of politics. And ever since that time up to now, the problem of Uganda has been that the educated middle class are centered and privileged in politics in a way that is disconnected from the mass of the people.
Is that I can understand that in terms of structure, in terms of the setup of parliament. But how about people who get elected right from the grassroots? You know, you like many people become members of parliament from their constituencies, from their culture.
Then what happens to
their
them?
Communities.
Then what happens to them?
So it's not structure. It's
well, you see, one's class consciousness.
Let me give you an example. Look at it. Look at a guy like Nandela Mafaba. He's the leader of BCU. Once he reaches parliament, would you use the same critique against him? Would you say he's disconnected?
Well, I'm not very sure what he's doing at present. I know he did a lot of very, very interesting work in the 1990s and the 2000s in safeguarding the BCU as just about the last man standing in the cooperative movement, mobilizing the population. He did a lot of things even outside it. He used to run clinics, medical clinics for his voters, and so on. So unless we get into the details of how, why, and what caused the splits in the FDC, which is his party, and led to Dr.
I was using him as an example.
Well, I'm saying I haven't yet gathered enough information about him to know if it has happened to him.
Let
me give you two other examples. Because when I say the grassroots movement then starts to disintegrate, what happens is that it loses a political voice, and it also suffers damage to its class consciousness. So I can give you two examples of that. You look at a woman like former Honorable Agnes Nandut. You hear these people and their stories, which has now degenerated into what I call Jemvudeism. You see? I mean, these are people who, technically speaking, belong to the proletariat. They come from either poor peasant families or working class families. These are people who will tell you that they've worked as housemaids.
Yeah.
They've worked as poor farmers. They have worked as cleaners in corporate offices. They have lived as poor people. They have lived the way everybody else who is poor in this country lives. There's her as one example. The other example is now the former speaker herself, Anita Amao. Very similar background, you see. And with all the crisis that has been there in the working class in this country, which is a crisis apart from low earnings and so on, there's also the precariousness. You see, it's not like you're fixed in one place and you're working there and you're poor and that's the end of your life. There's also this indigence that they have to travel to various parts of the country to continue looking for work. I think Honorable Nanduta at one point ended up even in Kenya, working, I think, as a housemaid or something. But now look at what happens to them once they enter parliament. Okay? Because Nanduta is now in jail accused of stealing resources from poor people. Okay? There were other stories about her before that, about demanding a new car, official car, demanding refurbishment of her office. In other words, the utterly crass and vainglorious standard behavior of the petite bourgeois class.
I'm curious to know, Kalundi, how would you define somebody from the grassroots who would all of a sudden be chosen or elected from among us to represent us and doesn't lose themselves into sort of the trappings of the structure in which they operate? Who will that grassroots person look like, and how do you protect that person from being corrupted?
Well, you see, as the historical problem of this country has been that since the situation I was describing for you with Cohen's reform, because before that you had all sorts of formations. You had one, I believe, at some point called Abawejere. You had the Bataka Boom movement, which was the expansion of the Bataka movement. You had Semakula Mulumba and his movements and so on. You had various conscious grassroots formations. As I said to you, what the impact of Cohen's reforms is to create a place where middle-class politics gets facilitated and rewarded while disintegrating the capacity for grassroots formations to continue existing. With that, you lose what I guess they would call class consciousness. Politics now becomes a career and a route. So what many of us now do is that we involve ourselves even in grassroots activism, in the belief that it is a beginning of a journey where we might end up on the other side in parliament with all the benefits that come from being in parliament.
How do you facilitate, how do you safeguard the person from that sort of corruption? Because you see, Kalundi, all of us growing up have these dreams of transforming this country right from the grassroots. And then along the way, we lose our class consciousness.
Well, let me give you a simple example. At some point, the people power movement began to speak like the movement of the ordinary person. All that talk of the ghetto and so on and so forth. And many people were very interested in that, many young people, and not just poor and uneducated young people, but even in some cases, people from much more educated or comfortable backgrounds, but who had a concern about this issue, about the direction the society and the country is taken. There emerged a point of discussion within the movement, as far as I've been informed, where they began to suggest that it's about time we created a set of reference points. It's about time we created the framework of an ideology. Who are we as a movement? What are we trying to achieve? Who do we see as our friends? Who do we see as our enemies? We need an ideology
that defines us. Okay, beyond the slogan, people power, our power, and other things. Now, apparently this was dismissed from not the very top, but near the top. And actually, it was other ordinary people who were also used to get rid of it. They would say that, no, that talk of ideologies for elites. For us, we know what we're doing. So, of course, People Power, shortly after that transition, and became a properly registered political party, participated in election and produced MPs.
Yeah.
What has happened since then, everyone can see. Did you see what I'm saying?
There's something I'm struggling in between there.
I'm trying to answer your question. I'm trying to tell you that until or unless you can maintain an autonomous center of activism and knowledge production that is accountable to ordinary people. In other words, a party for ordinary people that is interested in remaining a party for ordinary people, as opposed to becoming a vehicle for producing careers for some people, okay? You're going to continue in this loop. So what you want to do is to go back historically and look at those moments when Ugandan society produced a party that said it was committed to the concerns of ordinary people and was not interested in offers of power, either as the government or as in a parliament. When are those moments in our history?
I'm curious. There's a point where I was following properly, but then I felt at some point when you speak about the example of NUP, along the way it grows out of the ordinary person, but then along the way it looks like it gets corrupted because Kalundi, at some point, as you're developing a political party or an ideology, you want to work with your elite. You want to work with the educated. How do you cultivate a sort of a critical mass which appreciates the idea that first of all we're trapped in a structure which is interested in corrupting us and giving us sparks? You need to get your best. How do you get the people who will sustain that sort of thinking? Because otherwise,
well, that's why you need knowledge production at grassroots level. You need to have those conversations.
how do you do that?
Well, what you don't do is rush into parliament, because parliament is designed to sedate people. Parliament is designed to co-opt people. I mean, if I was, 25 years old or 30 years old, and whether I'm a graduate or not, I was spent the previous decade battling with the realities of Uganda and Kampala, loans and
That's
all that stress.
And that's what I want to ask you.
And then one day you give me a job where my basic salary is 25 million shillings a month, before you even count any of the other things. Even if I wanted to be steadfast,
Exactly.
what are the broad expectations of the people I've come with?
But again, you're not
Starting with my spouse, with my parents, with anybody who, from when I was in P1 up to when I got to university or S6, ever contributed to my school fees, which can amount to a very large number of people, okay? From your neighbor to your singer to whatever. So it is literally designed to overwhelm the thing that you want. That it simply floods these people with so much money and benefits and whatever in such a short space of time. It is very, very, very hard to be able to stand firm and resist the temptation.
I want to ask you the opposite of that. How do I deal with these expectations?
Okay, let me give you a practical answer. Professor Dan Nabudega, who built one of the types of grassroots parties I'm talking about, because he built a communist party in this country that existed from about 1964 to 1993. And it was actually well known for producing people like that, who would refuse to become part of whichever was the government of the day and say that's not brought us.
in his own personal case, when he came back from exile in about 1994-95, there was a lot of excitement, especially in the area he comes from. He was a very big name there. He was very famous as a political activist and a lawyer. And when he arrived, it must have been 92, 93, but that's when the country was gearing up to elect the Constituent Assembly.
Yeah.
So, of course, his community came to him in his home in Mbale and put it to him in a very insistent way that he is the one they want to elect to go and represent the CA.
Yeah, as their delegate.
Yeah. He had no interest in this. Okay. But what he did is that he gave them a deal. He said, okay, I'll do it. I'll register for election. We'll do the campaigns, and hopefully I'll get elected. Okay? On one condition, that after the CA, the Constituent Assembly has done its work and produced a constitution, and the country has taken the constitution, you don't come back here and ask me to run as MP. And they all said, fine. So the campaigns took place. He was elected to the CA. He participated as best he could. He's among those who refused to sign the finished document and so on. But then that was that. Now it came the time to elect the first parliament under the new constitution. And the same community came back to his house and said that now, okay, we know what we talked about, but you see, you're our person, you represented all the things you imagine they would say. We would like you to run for MP. And he said, but what did I tell you? What did we agree? And then they said, yeah, we understand. And he said, no, why should we do something different from what we agreed? Why did we agree on that if now you want us to do this? Okay? And he absolutely refused. You see what I'm saying?
I'm curious.
So I'm saying, if you have developed the consciousness in yourself as an individual, or within the circle of activists you work in, it's just a question of saying no.
I want you to frame this activist within the time. I'm very interested in the time, because I see many people as conscripts, not as volunteers. And I think that's a major difference for me. That people have these ideas and they end up being conscripted. How does this sort of grassroots revolutionary frame himself or themselves within this sort of structure, which is overwhelmingly overwhelming?
The first thing you have to do is change your value system as an individual. You have to sit down and audit yourself as a human being and ask yourself, in my own life, what things are important to me and what things are not. And also, number two, therefore, what things should be important to me in terms of my stated interests and ambitions, and what things should not be important to me. Okay? Now, for our younger generation, that is a very, very difficult question to tackle.
Exactly, because of the time.
Because of the time.
Because
they have been bombarded.
They are graduates of the sort of school which teaches materialism, that at the end of the day, a good life means
certain
materials, particular
yes.
things. How do you...
Well, you see, it's a question that they have to wrestle with themselves. Okay? And I've seen very serious-minded people I even respected at some point, also succumb to that nonsense. So I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying if they want to permanently get out of the situation that they find themselves in as a society, they are going to have to find the method of wrestling with this question. So the first thing you have to do is to talk among yourselves and to critique life as it has been. Okay? And to understand that anything you want in life requires a sacrifice. This is what I'm saying. And to accept that reality. And then to begin to put your new value system into effect. But understand it's going to change your life. If you're a young man, the kind of women you might have been interested in will no longer be interested in you. Okay? If you're an older person, even some of your children might become disgusted with you. Okay? If you are a married man, you might find that even your spouse mobilizes the children against you and tells you that it seems your father has gone mad.
How does a revolutionary sort of manage all these?
Well, you stand with your colleagues and just accept it.
And where does the critical mass come from? Because that could be.
You see, there have been what people don't understand, that there have been many people like this in our history. But one of the things we don't do, which we should do as part of the process you're asking, is to talk about these historical figures. People like Omutaka Yoswakati, the only member of the Bakungu, the then Luchiko, who refused to sign the 1900 agreement. Okay? Something which turned his life completely upside down. He ended up being detained in Kitgum, I think, for about 20 years. But before that, he continued campaigning the 1900 agreement. At one point, the people were just wearing a bark cloth, even though his name was Yosua. He was a Christian, he was an Anglican. But they rejected the life being brought by colonialism. They even rejected taking modern medicine. They rejected the Anglican church. They started their own Christian church called Bamalaki. And they were kind of seen as outcasts. But they stuck to their guns. You look at the life of Semakula Murumba. Same sort of thing. Okay? You look at the life of Chiuka Chiganira. These figures have been there in our history. Okay? You look at the life of Dan Naudere. Okay? He was even offered, at one point, the president of the republic approached him in secret and wanted to persuade him to become the Secretary General of the NRM. Okay? And he told him, I'm not interested in this. Okay, so I'm saying, in the end, one, don't imagine that you're the first person to be facing this challenge as a young person. Number two, therefore, learn from what has been the experience of others. How did they manage it? Okay.
Kalundi, I feel you downplay the perversity of the time. I think you're downplaying, we are in sort of a neoliberal apocalypse in this country. So, for example, in America, what the ideas of a good life mean more goods, right? And I think that's the intensity of such an understanding of the world we live in now is here. And I think we're downplaying this reality, but we are so much into the neoliberal modernity.
Well, you think so? I mean, there's so many things. That's why some of us believe we have an advantage coming from a background of arts, and especially theater. Because what theater does is, and what even all fiction writing does, is to invite you to imagine the lives of others. Okay? What have we seen with these middle class lifestyles and these very wealthy lifestyles? We have seen, number one, that even the rich are not happy. And even the rich are not rich. And even the rich are living in fear. Okay? Because what is the point of being rich in an extremely poor and chaotic society? This is number one. Number two...
You live above everybody else.
Well, so you think so. But it will catch you here and there. You see? You cannot escape Bobby Wine himself said it once, that no matter how much money you have, the minute you step outside your house in this country, you are poor. Okay? Because you're using the same roads as everybody else. You look at this man, this land grabber from Kayunga district.
Karangwa.
He's apparently extremely wealthy.
He passed recently.
Yeah, he got into a car crash. Yeah. Okay? Yeah. Then he was taken to a hospital and he died. Number one, how did he get from the site of the car crash to the hospital? Do you know?
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah.
How?
The ambulances kept collapsing.
He was taken on a border.
On a border, finally.
Okay.
Yeah.
With all that money, he went to the border.
Yeah.
Number two, what happened when he got to the hospital? He didn't really have the means to attend to his problem. Yeah. And so he died. But he was rich.
Yeah, but
okay.
Kalundi, you left
but
me
he
at
died of poverty. Because you can't have been in a very serious car crash. Yeah. And then they're carrying your body bouncing on a board.
On a bike. I agree with you too. as far as that point goes, that there are no rich people in this country as long as everybody is poor. But I'm curious to know, and you know, I'm with you, but I'm curious. I want you to articulate this a bit more. I'm curious to know how we develop a critical mass that makes these ideas mainstream. That you, at some point, you have a mass which doesn't believe, which is sort of guarded against the corruption of.
All right, that's a very good question, and I see two aspects to it. The first one is to fight against what I call the politics of envy, which is a phrase I first heard from a German, I think, psychiatrist, writer called Erich Fromm, who very few people have ever heard of. What we tend to try to call class consciousness in this country tends actually to be or to degenerate into the politics of envy. Okay? I'll just give you the examples of our three most substantial presidents. The three most substantial presidents we have had in this country are Milton Obote, Idi Amin, and Yoweri Museveni. Okay? Now, they have come with some very radical statements because Obote reached a point of talking about socialism and fighting feudalism and privilege and everyone must be equal. Okay? Amin used to talk about fighting mafuta nyingi and so on and so forth. And there was this whole attitude against educated people. And of course, this regime under President Museveni talks constantly about how they're the party of the peasants. And they're trying to transform peasant society, and the problem has been again the rich. Okay, I can tell you for a fact that certainly in the case of Museveni and Amin, their children have literally been probably educated by the exact same teachers. Okay, because what do they do when they take power? The first thing they do is get their families, their children, and put them in the most privileged institutions. Okay? So Amin's children went to Namagunga. Okay? And Museveni's daughters went to Namagunga.
They wish them a good education. They wish them a good education.
No, there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with it at all. But I'm saying if you are claiming the opposite, you see, a good education is not where you spend a lot of money. Okay, a good education is where a lot of good knowledge is transferred from teacher to child. Okay, now the two models are historically those ones where you create an institution that attracts the best teachers. Okay, you pay them enough to hold them, and then you use that to get parents to bring their children there. Okay, because they know this school has good quality teachers at least. All right? Now, you can create a UPE school with good quality teachers if you organize the economics around it. In other words, whatever is taught in the classroom at Namagunga Primary or Secondary, or St. Mary's Kisubi Primary or Secondary and Kabodja, or all these schools, the information being passed from teacher to student can be taught in a UPE school in Mayuge. If you could make it in the interest of a teacher to find no problem teaching in a UPE school in Mayuge. This is what I'm saying. The problem is you don't want to organize the economics to create that reality. The thing you have spent your political career critiquing, that the poor, now you're in power, you're the president. You don't say, okay, now let me overhaul the education system such that I am personally going to send my child to Namagunga. But I want a child who is in whatever SS, in Idudi or somewhere, to be being taught exactly the same things my daughter is being taught in Namagunga. The same lab facilities, the same quality of textbooks, the same quality of sleeping quarters, the same quality of food. This is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but Kalundi, we are now in neoliberalism where we have private schools and government schools.
Yeah.
And there's some people holding in charge of public schools by investors in private schools.
Yes.
And I'm just curious if maybe
No. You see, it's very. Sorry. Okay, finish.
because the example you give me of how we get out of creating a critical mass, it doesn't sit well with me under a neoliberal modernity where the best schools tend to be private schools inexpensively. And governments have been denied the resources through a series of other circumstances.
I don't know if they're necessarily the best
school.
schools. I think that the schools where possibly a child might have a somewhat better chance than in another school. You see what I'm saying? In terms of the facilities available. Because the other question, of course, is what is the content of what is being taught there? What history are they being taught? How is science being oriented in what they're being taught? Because what they're being taught ultimately is that all knowledge comes out of the West. That's what they're being taught. And that Africa and Africans have not produced knowledge. So there's a cultural problem there. So from that point of view, I would say you might find it's not necessarily the best. But what I am saying is that if you have built your career preaching equality, okay, and then when you get a chance to deliver equality, you do the opposite, then there is a problem with you. That is what I call the politics of envy. That's the first type of class consciousness that comes into root. That people are trained to normalize envy, to be envious of those who they think are better off than themselves.
But once they fall into the same things, they...
Okay, in order to remove them, okay, but not remove the system that created them, but to remove them, okay? If the elites, are giving you a historical example, if the elites of the Anglican hierarchy all over colonial Uganda, okay, you go from eastern Uganda to Lango and Teso, to northern Uganda, to West Nile, and so on. Look at the people who formed what are called the rural elites in those societies. The rural elites in those societies are the ones that created what become people like the family of Milton Obote, which actually converted from Islam and became a Christian family. Okay, that's why his first cousin, Adoko Nechon, is a Muslim, and for him he's a Christian. Even the family of Henry Chamber, who is from the rural elites, Anglicans, or Busoga, his father was a Muslim. But you see, once it became clear that now the British are here and they're here to stay, people became Anglicans. Let me finish the example. People became deacons. People became in the administrative staff of the district government. People became so-called chiefs. People became rural headmasters. Okay, and they produced children who were not strictly speaking poor peasants. All right, but they came from poor rural areas. This is literally, demographically, the entire social basis of the Uganda People's Congress Party. Okay? So, what the Uganda People's Congress Party created and fed off was a politics of envy. Okay? That why are we small elites here when we can be big elites in Kampala? What is the obstacle? Buganda. Okay? So get rid of Buganda. And then they all moved in. They are now the ones living in Kololo. They're now the ones living in Nakasero. They're now the ones sending their children to all those schools.
Instead of creating a system which enables...
Yeah, so that is one type of consciousness that emerges. That becomes a political currency and a political tool. And that has served the children of rural elites from the 1960s up to today. Another type of consciousness would not be concerned with simply replacing whoever is there. Okay? It would be concerned with saying what we want to do is transform the way everybody lives. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Not necessarily materially. Okay? Because if you look at the history of the Chinese Revolution, one of the things that China tried to build was a uniform education system.
Yes.
Okay? So you don't feel that I have to live in a certain part of the country for my child to get a
that
good education.
Yeah.
What you do is that you create one good standard.
Yeah.
Okay?
Iran.
Everyone gets that. And then those children who will emerge to be engineers and chemists and doctors and whatever, there's as much chance as someone from rural area A as someone from the city. What is required is that you pass the same standard of exam and tests because you have all been more or less educated in the same way. Then the selectiveness starts much higher up, based largely on talent.
Listening to you, Kalundi, that sounds the model in Iran, the model in China, the model in many of these proudly communist countries. And I think what you're suggesting, and I've been asking you about the time, and especially the nature, the choices we made. You know, I say we made, but the regime of ordering things under which we live, which is sort of a capitalist, privatized regime of doing things. That model seems difficult to me to emulate in this country called Uganda. Because you see, to a degree, that's not the American dream. The American dream is one amongst you. Maybe just the American dream, like the Western European dream, that from amongst you, those who work so hard can rise above everybody else.
Okay.
And they can get the best.
Fine.
And I want to come back to the question about time. That if this is the life we live in Uganda, if that's the regime of order in the world we live in Uganda, practically, because the dream is beautiful, Kalundi, I agree with you, how do we build it in this country? Are you calling for revolution? How do we build that at some point then this consciousness become the mainstream? How are we going to do that?
Well, you see, speaking personally, I've always been interested in revolution. From my 20s up to now in my 60s. That is what we were concerned with many colleagues. But we dealt with the realities, that you keep on describing, that to what extent, even if they need one, to what extent do the ordinary people of Uganda actually want one? Because those are two different things. You might be in need of something, but you don't want it. Okay? Someone can look at you and say, oh, you need to see a doctor. But you're saying that I don't want to go. You see what I'm saying? Because one, examine what we have as an education system. It trains us to be highly individualistic. I don't know if they said it when you were in boarding schools here. But it was a common phrase we used to hear when I was in boarding school, where boys would say, I came alone with my suitcase. I came alone. I don't know if you used to hear that phrase.
Yes.
Yeah. Meaning I'm not accountable to anyone else. I'm here for my own thing. Also, because the model hasn't changed from the days when you had basically one university, Makerere, which, let's face it, is still the university everyone wants to go to, if they were to get a chance. Okay? Every other university, frankly, is seen as a plan B or a plan C. Okay? But you were told you had one university here. But then in the country of then, in 1986, we were 13 million people, which was still a lot of people. You had, I don't know how many primary schools. So by definition, everybody else in your classroom was your competitor, was your rival. Because the only point of being put in P1 under the Ugandan education system, in terms of how it is designed and how they go think about it, is one day to end up at university.
Yeah.
And in those days, there was one university.
Exactly. You're competing.
Now, the number of places at the university were fixed.
Yes.
And they were much less than the number of places in P1. So that automatically meant we are here to eliminate each other.
Yeah.
Game of Thrones.
Exactly. Yeah.
Without saying it.
Yeah. That's the colonial modernity.
So you plant individualism in the children from P1.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I think some people, the examples you give me, are lucky to sort of overcome that.
Yeah.
But how do you, and I want you to address the time specifically. You know, I mean, the last 40 years we've lived under a clear-cut, individualistic, I mean, at some point, I'm been told we run out of time, individualistic, a colonial implant of a system that really cherishes the individual. The structure just program that were embraced by this government cherish the individual.
Yeah.
Like whatever was public provided to the general public disappeared completely overnight.
Yeah, individualism is an ideological enemy of class consciousness and of revolution.
How do you negotiate? People power movement has a school. I don't know what they teach there, but I don't know if they teach this kind of things concerning the MPs. In Kigali, there's a school of governance. The caricature, Africa's problem is the governance question. And I'm curious, the stuff that you're telling me about representation, about delegates actually representing from the grassroots and protecting themselves against losing their consciousness. In these times, with the hassles of life, struggling, take kids to school and have a meal on the table, how does a consciously developed grassroots activist negotiate these times?
Well, you see, the simplest method is what they used to call committing class suicide. Okay? Which is voluntarily surrendering the things that would have almost naturally come into your life if you had pursued the line of careerism and so on. So you make it, you change the way you practically live so that those who are not interested in what you are interested in instinctively keep away from you. Okay? Because if a woman, for example, is looking for, which is what I see in a lot of marriages, I'm sorry to say, a lot of women look at marriages as a vehicle. Where is this thing capable of taking me 20 years from now? I'm sorry to say, I see the pattern a lot, especially in marriages that come out of social interaction at Makerere University. You can really see that people have made a calculation that this one has good prospects. Okay? This one is a bright lawyer, maybe one day there will be a judge. Okay? That sort of thing. You can actually see it. I hope I'm not being too cynical, but I personally think I can see it. And that's why I think you also see that after a certain number of years of such marriages, it seems if certain things have not been
the expectations are not met,
you can then see problems in the marriage.
Ruptures, yes.
Exactly. I think you've seen it.
I have.
And that's why you also see a very high level of cross-ethnic marriages. Okay? Because then at that point, there is a class consciousness that supersedes any other kind of consciousness. But it's not a class consciousness of the working class or the peasantry. It's a class consciousness of the middle class. That first and foremost, I must fulfill my class ambition. By the age of 30, 35, we should be living in a certain way. I call it driving a car through the gate in the evening. Okay? And if this marriage fails to deliver that, then we have to have a new conversation. Okay? So what you can do is to preempt all that by not appearing to play that game in the beginning, so that the kind of person who would have been attracted to you because they think those are going to be the products of your personal relationship will keep away from you and try somewhere else. Because the most tragic kind of revolutionary I've seen in my life is somebody who wants to live in both houses at the same time. He's normally in a situation worse than even a polygamist. Okay, or a bigamist.
Polygamists are not in a worse position.
Yeah, because polygamy is open, but you find somebody, he wants to deliver the petite bourgeois lifestyle for his wife and her kids, but at the same time he wants to be in the trenches with the peasants and the working class, and it simply doesn't work out. You see?
Our time has been fast spent, Kalundi. I plan to ask you 3 questions, but it looks like we spent the entire hour talking about just one question.
Well, you were the one asking.
I think we'll get time to come back and continue this conversation with Kalundi.
Fine.
This has been the Observer Viewpoint. I plan to ask Kalundi 3 questions, but we end up spending this entire time just going around one question. See you next time.